All right, Mr. Chairman, we're ready when you are.
All right. I'd like to call a special community development committee meeting to order. And as customary, I would like to ask Councilman Seekings if you can do us a short invocation, please.
Lord, Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to gather here today in this special place, together looking to make this community the best that it can be. For those who are literally in harm's way with the storm today, please look down upon them with grace and tender mercy as we watch this storm go about. And as always, lead us to do what is best for all as we sit around these chambers. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Moving right along, we have anyone from the public participation. I think we have one person online, I guess. And anybody else?
We only have one person sign up online, Anthony Bryant.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, we have one in chamber, so I'll give each person at least a minute.
All right.
On line first, and then we'll come back to in person.
Mr. Bryant, if you're with us online, you can press *6 to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon to everyone. I wanted to give notice to Mr. Mitchell, our chairman, regarding Garden Hill, and that Teresa Winful and Joyce Hampton has organized the Garden Hill Neighborhood Association. They've been working closely with the neighborhood department, and we're looking to actually have a schedule of meetings, and we want to encourage staff and others to participate on this meeting in Councilmember Mitchell's district. And also we want to see whether or not we can get housing and community development to come in and do a need assessment for all the neighbors in Garden Hill, so they won't be code enforced unintentionally by the city based upon not having all the information necessary to avoid any code enforcement against them. Based upon an applicant through the BZA a couple months ago. Lastly, I want to talk in terms of having the department, the city police department, have more public hearings in our community. Merrick Garland was with Cheeto Walker on yesterday. Many of these granted programming activities require public engagement. The public engagement will be on a recorded public engagement with city council members there. To hear the concerns of the community, so they won't be blanketed by many of this. So just want to let that be known today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Under consideration.
Good evening.
Give us your name and address.
Okay. My name is Joseph Watson. I stay at 62 America Street down the east side for the last 67 years. I wanted to talk to you about the Union Pier site and what we must continue. Number one is that agreement that we have, that contract we have with the state port about the development there and affordable housing. We must keep that in place. We cannot really take it and not look at all the people being able to say, be in the community. Next on there is where I talked about the flooding and what I gave y'all. And we need to address those floodings now and what's in the Dutch dialogue so that we use that to really solve the flooding here in the city. We should do that every year, one or two instances. We should look at it and really address it so we get to the place where we have it all done sometime in the future. The last thing on there is mass transit. This site is going to create probably 400 more cars within the city. And we need to get the mass transit where, and then ask the people in the peninsula to say, agree, we're going to use that instead of all of us putting on a fat suit to get around town. All right. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Watson. Round down to new business. And the first business is a presentation and consideration of the Charleston housing goals, Department of Housing and Urban Community Development, the Bloomberg Associates. So they're going to have Donna do a presentation. And you want to use the screen, right? So I'm going to slide over a little bit so you can be able to
Naaman, if you would, just introduce yourself and your team, before you start things.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Excited to be here with all of you. Good afternoon, Mayor and council members. My name is Naaman Freeman. I am with Bloomberg Associates. If you're not familiar with Bloomberg Associates, we're part of the larger Bloomberg universe. Mike Bloomberg's personal philanthropy, which is Bloomberg Philanthropies, has an offshoot, which is our consulting group. We provide pro bono consulting to mayors and to cities around the world. We work across transportation, social services, economic development, and so on. I lead all of our work on housing and housing affordability. For the past almost 4 months now, I've been working with the City of Charleston, Mayor Cogswell, and Director Johnson to put together some housing goals for the City of Charleston. So we're going to present that here today. I'm looking forward to your feedback. Good to go? All right, you guys mind if I sit down for this one? All right.
Excuse
Before
me,
you,
interruption, but we're going to ask everyone to hold their questions after the presentation.
And
the only thing I was going to mention too, I think that's important, is that these are housing goals for discussion purposes.
correct.
They're going to provide the data and information that they've done, but the purpose of this presentation is to have a healthy dialogue on what the defined plan would be for the city of Charleston moving forward.
That's 100% correct. You will see draft all over this document, and the targets that are within it are in draft form right now. That's because we're waiting feedback from you. We're still doing additional analyses. And so what you see in front of you today is not the final product. And as the councilman said, we're going to ask if you can hold questions until the end. Outside of that, though, if you have clarifying questions about what is on the slide or something that I've said, you can ask those during the presentation, but anything else for discussion, please hold to the end. Okay. All right, so today we're gonna, of course, I'm gonna give you guys an overview of the scope of work. I want to talk through kind of some context about housing affordability in Charleston that'll really set the stage for the discussion of the goals. And then we'll talk the actual goals themselves, and then we'll get into next steps. So our scope of work was really to set the trajectory for the city of Charleston in terms of housing. That means coming up with some defined quantitative housing goals. And there are 4 phases to that work. The first of those 4 phases was to really do our due diligence, to look at all of the work that you all have done to date. You know, we are not starting from scratch. You all have put together a number of plans, come up with a number of strategies, and we referenced those and looked at those to come up with the baseline for these goals. We've been spending the past several months drafting the goals themselves, the language, the quantitative targets. We wanted them to be both reasonable but also ambitious. And right now we're in between phase 2 and phase 3, phase 3 being goal calibration. This process is meant to be moving in parallel with the budget process that is happening. That is because we need to make sure that the goals we set, the targets that we set, are backed up and aligned with the actual budget of the city. We don't want the goals to exceed what the city is actually able to achieve, even if it is ambitious. And we also don't want to make sure we spend more money than we have to, right? The final phase we're hoping of this process will be around the end of the calendar year as we finalize the goals and we determine what those final targets, finalize the budget and determine what the final targets are for the goals. So as many of you all know, Charleston continues to be a very appealing place for people around the country and from outside the country. It, along with the entire Southeast, has really led the country in terms of population growth, but the Low Country has been in the top 5 for regional growth for almost 5 years. And Charleston has been leading that for almost a decade, right? That growth, though, has brought higher income households. And those higher income households have really contributed to the median family income going up almost 79% in 10 years. That's huge, right? Those people will continue to come. But what's happening is those people are not just coming here. I know that net growth in Charleston is around 15% for the metro area, or 15,000 people annually in the metro area. But that is comprised of around 50,000 people per year coming in, but then around 35,000 people going out. And those people going out are going out into the outer areas of the metro area and the region. And I think that's very important to understand as we think about why they may be going out, right? So these housing costs could be or are likely a big part of why some of those people are having to go out. Housing costs are a major contributor to inflation. I know many of you are paying attention to the national news and how CPI or core inflation is changing. Housing makes up 45% of core inflation. And so right now in Charleston, you need about $27 an hour to afford the median one-bedroom apartment. And so if you look at some of the professions or jobs on the right hand of the screen here, you'll see that there are not that many that are able to afford a one-bedroom apartment, right? On that list right now, it's just the registered nurses. And so all of the other professions and jobs that make this city run and contribute to the economy, those people are not able to afford the median apartment in Charleston. And so what that ultimately has resulted in is that there's a need of about 16,000 units by 2030 at or below 80% of AMI. We've double checked the numbers that you all ran in 2021 that were part of the city plan, and those numbers are pretty close to still relevant, right? And, it's not just that there's a need at the 80% of AMI level, there's a more intense need at the lower AMI levels of 50% of AMI, and there's a total need of 32,000 units. And so I think that 32,000 number is a number we want to keep in our minds as we think about the rest of this presentation. I think we can expect the region to actually get to 32,000 units, but in lieu of that, we need to make sure that we really address the needs of lower income people as they will be impacted the most if we do not kind of accommodate the growth with new supply. At 16,000? Yes, that's correct. Right. So what happens if the city doesn't prioritize housing and housing affordability, right? I think whether the city invests and prioritize it or not, the region's going to continue to grow. The people that want to come here are going to come here whether you build housing or not. And I think that's a concept that I think people really have to come to terms with. Not building housing is not going to stop people from coming to the city. And so if you invest in more housing in Charleston, that means that there is additional housing supply to accommodate that new growth. I think that's an important thing to understand, because if you don't, that means that there's not additional housing supply in the city to accommodate that growth. So if you don't invest in more housing and there isn't additional housing supply in the city, that means there's more competition. That means that those higher income individuals that are moving into the city are competing with the lower income individuals who perhaps are not in income restricted units, right? And we all know what happens when higher income people compete for a product with lower income people. The higher income people win, right? And so what ends up resulting in that is displacement. And so if the city does not invest in housing, a lot of these lower income people will be displaced by higher income immigrants. But if the city does invest in housing, that means that there's a larger population for the city to spread the tax burden across. There's going to be a growing need for infrastructure and for services, regardless of whether or not people live in the city. Tourism is going to grow, jobs are going to grow. And so that tax burden, if it's borne by more people, means lower taxes for everyone. And then agency. We know how important neighborhood character and architecture and history is to the citizens of Charleston. If that development happens in the city will have agency over it. If it doesn't happen in the city won't have agency over it, meaning that you won't have a say in how it looks and where it goes. And if that investment does not happen, and most of the growth that's coming to the region is accommodated outside of the city of Charleston, it's going to have to be car-centric. Over the past decade and a half, we already know that most of the commuting patterns that happen from James and Johns Island, those commuting patterns that happen from Hanahan, that happen from other places throughout the region, most of those people are going out of those places and into the city rather than into those places. And that means if they're going out of those places and into the city, they're clogging the arterial roads that come into the city. I think most of you experience that on a day-to-day basis. And so not investing in housing in in Charleston means more traffic. But I think ultimately you guys are going to make the right decision and make sure to prioritize housing affordability, and what that means is that more people will be able to live and work in Charleston. It will be easier for the small businesses to find employees, for your local restaurants to find waiters and cooks, for the hotels to find staff. And what that means ultimately is a lower cost of living. As we said earlier, housing is the key contributor to inflation. And so if you handle the housing situation, your cost and your goods and services will grow at a much lower rate. So knowing that there's a big difference between what happens if you do prioritize and invest in housing versus if you don't, I think the city has started to think about how does it prioritize or what should its goals be for housing by 2030. The first of those goals is to make sure they create 3,500 more affordable or attainable homes. The second is to make sure we actually contribute to the overall supply, which is just as important as addressing the low income affordable housing need. So building at least 7,500 new homes in total. I think the city also needs to make sure that the market is able to provide affordable home ownership options for moderate income households, meaning that we want to increase the number of homes that are sold at an affordable price, or around $300,000 a year. We're going to talk more about that number and where we are with that. And I think the big goal, which is I think the one that is the basis or is the foundation for everything else, is catalyzing enough funds, or $800 million of investment in affordable housing, to make the other goals happen. The last two goals are really about dealing with the impacts of increasing housing costs, right? So reducing the number of persons experiencing homelessness by 25%, which is in line with federal expectations, and then stabilizing at least 1,000 existing households. So I'm going to go into detail for each of these goals and talk about how we came up with these quantitative targets in the next section of the presentation. So let's start with the first goal, right? Create 3,500 new affordable and attainable homes by 2030. Right, that means we want to have 3,500 net new long-term affordable homes in this city. Those are homes that have affordability terms of at least 20 years. And there's two ways in which you can create those new affordable homes. The first is to take from the existing housing stock that's already here, right? There are market rate homes and apartments in this city that can be converted through acquisition, and you can put income restrictions on those units. That's the first way, and likely the cheapest way to create new affordable or income restricted homes. The second is to build them from the ground up. I think the city is going to have to use both methodologies to get to that 3,500. I think that is the industry standard, or what's the best practice in terms of long-term, when you say recycling things. That's right. I think there are ways in which you can rate permanent affordability, and we can talk about that at the end of the presentation. Right now, the city has about 5,700 income restricted units. There are about 1,000 in the pipeline. That means we're almost, if we complete those units, you're almost a third of the way to the goal. But I think there are some things that are going to have to change, because what is in the pipeline is primarily for serving people at or above 80% of AMI or at or above 50% of AMI. And historically, the city has not produced enough housing, enough affordable housing at the rate it's going to need to meet this goal over the next 6 years. From 2017 to 2023, the city only completed just shy of 400 affordable housing units. That's around 57 units a year. The city's going to have to create about 584 on an annual basis to meet the goal. That was 7 years. Well, the city has, right now, about 5,700 total. 50, so on the previous slide, the current stock of income restricted units is 5,700. There are 1,000 in the pipeline. And over the past 7 years, around 400 were completed. I think the city has done a great job of making sure that these income restricted or affordable and attainable homes are near public transportation. I think that's critical to the city's long-term sustainability and viability, and that's a goal we want to continue. Not only are we setting a quantitative target at 3,500 units, we are making sure that those 3,500 are achieving our sub-targets or our smaller goals, right? We want 50% of those to be for people at or below 50% of AMI. The other half of those can be for people between 50 and 120% of AMI. We want at least 80% of those or 50% of those to be near transit, right? That minimizes the number of cars, as the gentleman was saying earlier, and promotes, better transportation systems. So not only do we need to create 3,500 affordable homes, I think the city needs to contribute to the overall supply. And remember that the study that you all did in 2021 cited that, although it wasn't published in the document, those consultants identified that there's a need of 32,000 total units by 2030. 7,500 is just a drop in the bucket based on the need. Ensuring that you increase overall housing supply will mean that there's better housing affordability for everyone in the city at every income segment, which I think is just as important as making sure that you have affordable homes for people at the lowest end of the spectrum. If you look at what's been happening historically, housing production really peaked in terms of completed units just around the pandemic. Permits, though, have dropped off precipitously in the past 2 years. That's largely because of macroeconomic conditions that are not in the city's control. Hopefully, interest rates will continue to go the other way, and I think that would help the city to see more production, particularly on multifamily going forward. So we also have sub-targets for this goal, right? I think we just don't want to see 7,500 more units. The city does not want to promote more sprawl. More sprawl means more traffic. Single-family homes are not as affordable as other typologies. You can't fit as many of them. So to promote affordability and to accommodate the growth that is coming to the city, no matter what, I think the city needs to kind of move towards a different typology and promote more missing middle and more multifamily and make sure that it's close to transportation. The city's already well on its way to the goal. 866 units have been completed already this year through June. That's more than halfway. And so that progress is significant. Most of those have been affordable. Most of those have been rental, but very few of them have been affordable, only 4 of them. There's a large number, though, that are in the pipeline. 17,000 are in the pipeline. The goal is 7,500, but 17,000 plus are in the pipeline. Less than 4,000 of those have permits and are likely to be completed before the end of our goal period, hopefully, right? But there's another 12,000 that are stuck. Those 12,000 are either in TRC review or at one of the 4 design boards. Yes.
Do you mind just giving us those numbers one more time?
There are over 17,000 that are in the pipeline, a little less than 4,000 of them have open permits, and there are about 12,000 that are in TRC review or at a design board.
Thank you.
Units, not developments, units. And we're working on trying to calculate the number of units that are what we call conceptual. Those are units that have approved PUDs and that are ideas that are moving forward. It's not a question of whether the city can reach the goal. I think it's a question of the city wants to and will reach the goal. It's a question of will, right? Yes, sir. I mean the city. Let's wait, hold that question to the end. I know where you're going with that. Let's hold that one to the end. Yes, sir. So the third goal is around home ownership. We know the American dream is important. Creating more homeowners is important. And I think the city's kind of take on this is that it would like to continue supporting low and moderate income homeowners in finding homes. But there's a role that the market should be playing. And so we want to increase the number of homes that are sold at an affordable price on an annual basis. Right now, we're trying to make sure we understand what that affordable price is exactly and how many homes are sold below that price. We're waiting on the Trident Area Association of Realtors to give us that data, and I think we'll refine this goal once we get that data from them. Right now, we're going with around $300,000 as that affordable price, and that's based on what we know someone at 80% of AMI and 120% of AMI can afford, but we will refine that. Setting that goal means that we'll have to do two things. We'll have to the city will have to get out of its own way, right? The city will have to move those units that are in review through the pipeline so that they get completed. And two, one of the things the city's already doing is it'll have to update its zoning code. Both of those things will help the market address the need for sale housing at the middle income spectrum, meaning that the city can then utilize its resources for lower income residents. If the city does this, that means it will be able to do a number of other things that are delineated in the sub-targets, right? Which are to increase the home ownership rate for low and moderate income households, to try and get that above 50%. Doing that would mean 1,000 renters at that income spectrum would have to become homeowners. That would also support reducing the racial home ownership gap by at least 5%. And the city would also continue to support low and moderate income homeowners through its programs directly, trying to reach at least 50 potential homeowners. So achieving all of these things is going to cost a lot of money. It is because it is not cheap to subsidize affordable housing. We thankfully had Greystar complete a study for us to look at two conceptual projects, one in West Ashley and one in West Edge. And looking at these two projects, one a 432 unit building and then another a 333 unit development, we were able to determine that the per unit subsidy need to turn all of those market rate units into affordable units was substantial. The need to turn all of them into 60% of AMI units for the West Ashley project was around 100,000. Whereas the need to turn all of them into 60% of AMI units for the West Edge project was close to 300,000. These are just two projects. And I think it's a very important concept to understand because there is no public developer, and you have to think about the cost to subsidize units and not the cost to build the units. So when you look at that per unit cost, and even if you use a $250,000 conservative estimate of how much it will cost to create those 3,500 units, right? Whether it's through conversion, preservation, or creating new units themselves from the ground up, you come up with about $800,000 in need. Now that amount is not what gets you to the actual, to filling the gap. Because I remember, as I said earlier, the gap is 16,000 units. This is just to get to the goal. And I think it's an ambitious goal. There's not a city in the US that is actually trying to fill the gap because it's not possible to fill the gap in a short time span. But I think it's a very ambitious goal to get to 3,500. And I think there are a couple of things the city is going to have to do to catalyze that $800 million in investment. I think the first and kind of the baseline thing to do is fund 100% of housing and community development staff from the general fund. There needs to be at least that much dedicated to HCD on an annual basis, so that whether or not federal funds and state funds come down the pike, the city can continue to run its programs.
Councilmember, can you use your microphone, please?
We're talking about making sure that we fund all existing,
I think so. I
Okay.
think, but as
because right now we're not. We're using grant
yes,
money to
that's correct.
subsidize. I understand.
I'm talking about minimum fund the existing, but as staff grows, as it will need to be to disperse the funding and achieve these goals, you'll need to fund all of the staff costs going forward. In addition to funding the staff, I think the city should strive for by 2030 to increase the recurring annual general fund allocation to at least 10 million. That's a small injection of capital expense to help support the housing need. Third thing is the city will need to come up with at least 200 million of public funding from alternative sources, whether that's another bond initiative, TIF, or exploring other revenue sources. There will need to be at least $200 million of other funding. And all of this together will help to the city can leverage this funding and use it to attract $500 million in private investment from other entities and philanthropic investment. Traditionally, the city has gotten most of its affordable housing and housing funding from the federal government. That funding is not increasing anytime soon. And a lot of the one-time injections that came through ARPA have now gone away. And if you look at what the city has done historically from a local level, most of that has come from the bond funding that was in 2018. So the fifth goal is around reducing homelessness. I think this goal is could have many economic benefits, not just for the people who are impacted directly, but for the larger economy and community around Charleston. The PIT count, the point in time count that happens once a year, estimates that there's around 404 unsheltered people in the city of Charleston. I think practitioners will agree that that's a severe underestimate. And the 254 current shelter beds and 442 current permanent supportive housing units are full. And so we need to invest in increasing the number of both shelter beds and permanent supportive housing units to accommodate the growing homelessness population. That population will continue to grow as the housing affordability situation continues to worsen. And then lastly, our final goal is to stabilize at least 1,000 existing households by 2030. Preventing displacement and keeping people in their homes is actually cheaper than creating new homes. And so the first way that the city can do this is to make sure that the 500 or so existing affordable units that are likely to expire over the next 6 years remain affordable. So that means extending the term of that affordability for those units. Because if we're going to add 3,500 more or net new units, we need to make sure we keep the ones we have. The second way the city can support this is by helping at least 400 renters avoid eviction through existing programs like the pro bono legal aid or the ShelterNet program. And then lastly, the city can continue to support supporting homeowners through rehabilitation assistance and setting a goal or a target for 100 homeowners over the next 6 years. And
we're-
so-
we're still at 80 and below homeownership, when you say creating 100 permanent homeownership units.
So the city's programs right now, they support up to 120% of AMI in terms of homeowner
So we're still,
rehabilitation.
gotcha.
Mhm. That's something we can explore and look at as to like how those city programs are maintained, but we're working with the city to kind of understand what are the best practices and any updates to programs that need to be made. So this has not been done in a silo, right? I think this has been a collaborative effort with an interdepartmental team across various departments. We've worked with a number of stakeholders throughout the region that are part of the housing ecosystem. They've given us feedback. They've let us know how their programs are working and what they can help, how they can help the city to achieve this, because these goals are pretty lofty and the city's not going to be able to achieve them on its own.
Just a quick question. I don't see the city of Charleston up there.
We're not a partner with ourselves.
Pardon?
This is our partners.
Whose logo is that? That's the city of Charleston's logo?
No, the city, this is the city. So the city has put these goals together. And so the city, as the other councilman said, can't partner with itself.
Just wanted to understand what that was.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, we included the planning department and traffic and transportation because, you know, housing is leading this effort and those other departments play a critical role in helping to facilitate it. Right. I think going forward, we're going to have to rely on these stakeholders and create some really good partnerships to make these goals happen. So next steps. We're going to continue working with the city through the end of the year. We're going to support the mayor and Director Johnson and everyone else here in the city in refining these goals and making sure that they align with the budget requests that are coming forward. In addition to doing that, we're going to make sure that we look at all the suite of programs that the city has and make sure that we refine those in any way necessary to kind of get the dollars out that are allocated in the most efficient and impactful way. And lastly, I'll say that, you know, this work is critical. The city needs to kind of address and invest in the housing situation. I think Charleston is a unique situation where it is bound by water, encroaching water. There is a traffic situation, there's infrastructure issues. And so as the city looks at addressing this housing situation, it's going to have to make sure that it takes into account, you know, investments in infrastructure and, you know, making sure that it follows the water plan to accommodate those issues as well as it invests in housing. So with that, I'll open the floor for questions. Thank you, guys.
How do you count? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go.
How do you count the 3,500? For an example, if we partner with the Charleston Housing Authority with infusion of X amount of dollars, how would we count toward the 3,500? And the same when we partner with nonprofits, okay? Because a lot of what we've done over the years to accomplish our goal, as you probably know, is through those type partnerships because
Correct.
of the limited funding that we do have.
Mm-hmm.
We've been able to leverage those limited funding
That's
into
correct.
really hundreds of units.
So
I just want to know, how do we count that?
that's a really good question. So the councilmember asked, you know, are we counting units that aren't necessarily fully funded by the city and are facilitated by other entities? And every single additional income restricted unit in the city will count towards this goal, whether or not the city funds it directly.
Any other? Councilman?
So I've got enough questions to fill up
I do too.
a meeting
I do.
outside of this. I'm sitting here writing, which is why I had to ask you to repeat something. So I'm just going to ask a couple and then turn over to somebody else. But so, you know, in terms of sprawl, the ill effects are already happening, right?
That's correct.
They've happened. There's no putting the genie back in that bottle, right? I
Mhm.
mean, so like, I live in outer West Ashley in Dorchester County. They're building 9,000 homes directly on 61, which is a 2-lane road that leads directly to the city of Charleston, where most of these people are going to work. And so, that's a problem for, more people than are in this room right now. But when we're talking about, where any new housing would go, we're talking about a pretty diffuse city to begin with. And so how do we make sure that we're putting these units in places that aren't going to exacerbate that problem without blowing up the price of whatever it is that we would consider?
When you say blowing up the price, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, in outer West Ashley, prices are going to be a lot cheaper than downtown Charleston, right? So the further you get out from the city, the cheaper property is going to be, and it's a pretty big city. And so, we sort of have those opportunities within the city, but inherently those cheaper prices are going to contribute to the problem that we know we would create by putting things further out.
I think you have to not just consider the cost of the development, but what are the long-term costs of putting those developments far in the outer reaches of the city, because it's going to cost you one way or the other. It can either cost you up front in terms of development cost and the price of land that you pay, which will be pretty nominal compared to what the cost of updating a lot of that infrastructure would be, or dealing with the impacts of not updating of not having updated infrastructure to accommodate that additional car traffic, right? Because much of that's not in your control. And I think it would be smarter to deal with what is in your control than to rely on something that is not in your control.
Sure. And the one other thing I'll ask, and you made a point of talking about extending affordability periods, which struck me as the most difficult thing of any of the things that you talked about. Have other cities done things like that?
That's 100% a best practice across the nation. I think the one thing that cities are prioritizing, from Washington, D.C. to California and LA and San Francisco, but also cities in the Southeast like Miami and Atlanta and cities in Texas, is the first thing on their docket is to make sure they don't lose the affordable units that they have. Those are the cheapest units to keep. It's much cheaper to extend the life of an existing affordable unit, right, than it is to build a new affordable unit from the ground up.
Got it.
Have it?
Fair enough. Thank you.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay, Councilman McBride?
Yes, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
We
we can
can.
hear you,
Yeah, okay.
Councilmember.
Got it, thanks. Again, great brief, and thanks for presenting this a few days ago, one-on-one with me. It was really good. On slide 19, I just wanted to get some clarification on so the build at least 7,500 new homes by 2030. And you're saying that in theory, we're going to greatly exceed that by a lot, but you're also talking about affordable homes, not just any home, right? So am I missing the intent of this slide?
Yeah, so I'll clarify that. I would not say that we are going to exceed it.
Right.
I would say that right now, as of the first 6 months, into the 6-year period, we are on track because you have 866 completed. But there's another 17,000, enough to far exceed the goal, that are stuck in the pipeline. And I would not say that if current practices continue, I would not say that there's a lot of confidence that though all of those units, or even half of those units, enough to meet the goal, would finish by the 6-year period.
Okay, and part of my confusion is, I mean, the main focus of this brief is affordable housing. It's not the only focus, right? But this is all types of housing, not because you have on there as the top category affordable units.
Mm-hmm.
and the rest of them are not necessarily affordable units. So you're just talking overall supply of housing.
That's correct. And so this second goal is around overall new doors or new homes that are created regardless of any affordability restrictions or whether it's rental or for sale. This is every new home, all new homes. And so the 3,500, it may be a bit confusing, but those 3,500 aren't necessarily all inclusive of the 7,500, right? The way we can achieve the 3,500 varies. So if we go back to the other slide, that 3,500 can be achieved in two different ways. You can convert or preserve existing units, which means you're not adding to the 7,500, or you can build new, which means you are adding as part of the 7,500, right?
Okay.
I think
Any
another,
other committee men?
I was gonna say, I think another important point that I had the same question, Councilman McBride, and I think it's a good one. But if you don't increase supply, then you're gonna have to increase affordable number of units.
Okay,
because
that
it's
makes sense.
supply, demand, right?
Yep.
Any other?
Can I
committee-
ask another follow-on, just a different question while I got the floor really quick?
All
And
right.
thanks for Mayor. That's the kind of, that's what I was looking for. You're basically just getting at, as part of the strategy to tackle the homelessness is to increase supply in general, so that the prices in general go down, which affects the bottom end as well, is what you're saying,
That's
I
correct.
think. Okay, got it. All right, now for slide 25. And 26. So you talk about preserving at least 500 existing home restricted. And when we met one-on-one, I mentioned that just on Johns Island, just for example, I know of at least 2 churches that are volunteering to help rebuild and restore homes on Johns Island to help prevent people from having, low-income people from having to move out of their homes that they've lived in for sometimes generations. And then the next slide, and you talk about partnering with NGOs, and there's not any, you go to the next slide. I don't see any religious-based organizations on there at all. Maybe some of them are loosely affiliated. But I just want to point out again that, churches, synagogues, religious organizations do help in this matter, not necessarily on a large scale, but at least definitely helping and keeping people in their homes. And just because I know 2 churches in Johns Island, there's probably many more that I don't know that are doing this kind of thing. And it's just a thought that, what the idea of partnering with a religious institution doesn't mean we're directing anything, obviously, because we can't do that. But at least from communication standpoint, just being a communication, gathering information, finding out where homes that could be rebuilt, and then communicating with churches and synagogues, et cetera, that we know do volunteer to restore those homes or repair those homes, rebuild those homes, et cetera. In addition to all these other NGOs, I think it would be an oversight to neglect those religious institutions that are doing that.
I think that is a best practice around the country to make sure that you enable and partner with faith-based institutions that actually have the assets that you need to solve this crisis. And I think it's not that we do not want to partner with them or have not, talked about and strategized about that. I think it's just that we did not include all of them on this list, and that in many ways we'll be working through many of the organizations on this list to kind of collaborate with those institutions.
If I may, in response to his, because we do have pastors, one. I don't see them up there.
And through the CRC.
Pardon?
Through the CRC.
Through the CRC,
Mhm.
okay. And for churches in particular, I think that we could also probably provide technical assistance to churches so that they can go directly to funders such as HUD and BA or whoever, because we do have hundreds of apartment units in the city where churches went directly to HUD for the funding, and HUD funded it and built them. They're now paid for, and they're being maintained as affordable units.
It's a great point.
I had some question, another question.
And
You-
Mr.
you- Okay, yeah. You talked about, you guys are involved in social, economic, the whole community kind of approach, Bloomberg. And one example of where we may be able to do additional affordable units, I think Greystar did something with West Edge. I think that was one of them. And I bring it up because I think that West Edge gives us an opportunity to perhaps partner with the Housing Authority for Gadsden Green and probably double that number, okay? Because through the RAD program, the Housing Authority would be able to increase those existing numbers substantially. And I'm saying all that to say because I think we just most recently, back in April, completed the Haggard Avenue study. And if you get an opportunity to review that study, you'll see that it's pretty comprehensive with respect to the West Edge area, as well as the Gadsden Green area, because it's an area where you have the Citadel, you have the College of Charleston, you have the city, you have West Edge, you have high schools. It's a rare opportunity for us to really partner West Edge and all the other entities I just listed to come up with helping us meet that 3,500 goal. And the one who has the money can bring the money to the table is the Housing Authority, okay, through its RADS program. So I think we will be missing an unbelievable opportunity if West Edge and all the other entities got together to create the Haggard study. That if we don't follow through.
Councilmember, I'm going to say that this is just the beginning of the work. This is just setting the trajectory. And I think what you stated is a very important potential strategy that the city should employ to get there. I think what we present today is not a strategy. It's just the goals themselves. And the work on the strategies has just begun.
I'm just trying to put some meat on it. That's all. Okay?
And I would say that
Okay.
the strategic work has just begun, and we're looking forward to working with you and everyone else on getting there.
And my last question is, how much is Bloomberg bringing to the table to help us with this?
That's a question I can't answer. I work for Bloomberg Associates, and we're just pro bono consultants, and we do not offer grants or any funds to cities for housing.
I asked that question before anyway. But anyway, we have Councilman Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Naaman, thank you so much for the presentation and for everybody that had a hand in this, including our staff and your team. And, we all have our affordable housing anecdotes here. My wife and I, we bought a house in Burns Downs, which was for generations a very modest working class neighborhood it was for a long time on the other side of the railroad tracks. We bought our house for 300 grand in 2013, and everybody in my family thought we had lost our minds. That was so expensive. We looked at a house in our neighborhood to sort of upsize recently that is about to hit the market for $1.5 million. And that's in 10 years. So it is, I'm not sure if we're the Bay Area yet or some of the worst markets in the country, but we are well on our way to being there, given how attractive Charleston is and given all the dynamics you've mentioned. The thing that always dawns on me is I think it's pretty easy to say that no jurisdiction in the state of South Carolina has done more for subsidizing and promoting affordable housing than the city of Charleston with Gianna and her leadership and current administration, prior administrations. But as Naaman mentioned in the beginning of his presentation, unfortunately, given all that work, all that effort, all the bonding that we did in the past and all those efforts, we're still bringing just essentially a drop in the bucket to the table every year, and we're just not making a dent on the problem through subsidy alone. And that's not to suggest that we ought to stop doing that. We need to be doing it. We need to be doing more of it. It's an important piece of the puzzle. I think just like we do with stormwater, it's an all the above approach. It's not one thing or another. It's everything. But the thing that is sort of my hobby horse and interest is what we can do from a regulatory perspective, the city of Charleston, to tweak our zoning ordinances, our land development regulations, our processes to make it easier for private development to help solve this problem. In every other market we have in this country, whether it be electronics, cars, cell phones, whatever you want to call it, when there's a affordability problem, innovators come to the market, they innovate, drive down costs, things of that nature. That doesn't happen often in housing, and a main culprit for that is unfortunately the regulatory barriers that cities put into place. And this oftentimes is not done intentionally, but that's the net effect of it. And so my question is, could you help us identify maybe one or two of the best practices you've seen, from around the country in terms of what the city can do in examining its zoning regulations, its processes, to sort of help open the spigot a little bit and help address that supply constraint that the mayor talked about a minute ago? Because at the end of the day, cost is a function of supply and demand. We need to get more supply on the market in the right places. I think opinions might vary on that, but there were almost 80,000 people that lived on the peninsula around the time of the Depression. I think it's maybe a quarter of that right now, if not less than that. So there's a lot more room to get people on the peninsula if we do it in the right places. But just wanted to get your thoughts on what are some of those regulatory reforms we can do to address that need at a regulatory level, which doesn't require a major outlay of subsidy. I mean, that's something we can, draw up in an ordinance and adopt and let the private sector get to work. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks again for all y'all have done.
Thank you, council member. And yeah, I am an urban planner. I have a background in urban planning, but I would love to defer to the city's expert on this. I think, Tim Keene is likely the person that probably should answer that question, but I will attempt to go ahead and give you a couple quick hits and best practices. I think first of which is you can reduce or get rid of parking requirements. They're costly, they take up a lot of space, and they contribute to a lot of the traffic that you guys complain about. I think the second thing is like what Houston has done in terms of reducing minimum lot sizes, right? So that you can have smaller homes and different types of cluster developments. And then the other thing is increasing density incrementally and within the character of the neighborhood around transit. And I think those three things are things that you can do pretty easily to contribute to reducing those barriers.
Any other committee members have a question? I'm make a quick, go ahead, I'll make a quick vote.
I want to respond to that, because the city of Charleston, we are already moving in that direction in terms of, certain developments, no parking, no cars. I think there's a project on Spring Street, not the medical university, but on the medical university campus on Ashley Avenue. They're getting ready to do 90 units, I think. And those units would also be parking restricted, meaning you can't have a car if you rent these units. So that's just to say that there are some approaches already in our city where we're moving in that direction.
Thank you. It's a lot of changes, a lot of information we have gotten here today. And to absorb all this information, I think we have to sit down very carefully and look through it all. This is a lot of information. And there's a lot of changes that have to be made, I know that. And we have to be very careful in making these changes to make sure it fits into the category of what we are doing here in the city of Charleston. I mean, some things are done elsewhere, but sometimes that don't mean it's going to happen in Charleston, work for the city of Charleston. So we have to be very careful in doing it, but I know we have to make some changes. And we will make some changes, throughout the year and trying to make sure that we have housing that's going to be benefit everyone, affordable, attainable housing. And that's one thing that, we here all push for so far as housing concerned. But you got to look at it in a global sense, if you may, of everyone who's living here in the city of Charleston. So if there's no other questions,
I guess we have to get our minimum up to $27 an hour so our staff can be able to afford to live in the city. Because that's what it'll take, right? $27 an hour. So I'm just saying on the other side, okay, we need to start raising salaries, continue to raise salaries so that our people can afford to live in the city.
Yeah, I know we have to work on some monies and everything. I always ask the question, and some of the colleagues always look at me and say, well, where is the money coming from? How much more money we're going to have to put in the budget to even do a lot of these things that we are proposing, even with staff. Where's the money going to come from? And I don't want to hear taxes, but where's the money going to come from? So those are some of the things that we have to look at very carefully. And when we're making various decisions, that's going to affect everyone that's living in the city of Charleston. It ought to make the city of Charleston grow, even with the housing part of it, affordable, attainable housing. So these things we were fighting a long time, and things are getting higher and higher instead of going lower and lower. So we have to look at it very carefully in doing so.
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Parker has her hand up.
Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for the presentation. And thank you, Councilmember Gregory, for that question, because you were reading my mind. If you could tell me again, so when you were back to AMI, did you make a recommendation, and I apologize that I'm mobile, but did you make a recommendation on, where you see the AMI needing to be? I mean, I know that adjusts, obviously adjusts with income, but I mean, what were your suggestions? And the reason I'm sort of asking is we just had our most recent, project that included some affordable units was the Sumar Street project. And I know there were some questions about AMI in that. So can you give me just a little more information, even if you covered it already, or just maybe go into a little more detail for me?
Sure. I think what you're asking is there a particular income level where the housing need is most acute? Is that correct?
Yeah, that might be a good place to start. And I think like Councilmember Gregory touched on, are we creating units that our workforce can attain? Are we creating units that food and bev, that those types of things? And
so I would say that most of the city's units that are existing already are at the 50% of AMI level or below, but the greatest need is also at 50% of AMI and below. And the units that are proposed or in the pipeline are not serving that income level. Most of the existing units that we have at that income level are products or byproducts of the housing authority. And so I think going forward, we've set targets to address the 50% of AMI and below level. And then I would say that if you are looking to understand kind of what 50% of AMI or below actually is, here's the most up-to-date kind of income limits for the city. So 50% of AMI for a household of 2 people would be a combined income of $42,000.
Okay, great. Can you go back to that initial, that first slide that you just put up after my question? Because I think that sort of helps answer my question. So again, our target, let me just ask, I'm just going to point blank. I mean, would our target in these types of agreements, when we shape them, should we be looking at the AMI 81 to 120, AMI to 51 to 80, or AMI 50 and below?
I think I can't answer that question specifically. I think what we can do is we can set targets for what the city wants to achieve over a 6-year period. And based on kind of the findings, what you can see from Greystar's conceptual study, the ability to subsidize or provide income restricted units at a certain income level depends on the specific financial details of that particular project. And so it really means that the city has to have an understanding and work with the developer to understand the cost and the potential profit margins for that project, and whether or not it can sustain providing income restricted units at a very low income level and still attract the necessary capital and investment to move forward at all.
Okay, great. Just a quick follow-up. So again, because on the flip side of that, I mean, obviously we want to pay our employees more, but we could also give a certain, there could be a pay bracket that we increase and they can't attain that housing that already exists, correct? So I feel like that's just a fine line that the city, again, has to navigate. We don't want to we want to create units for our workforce, but we don't want to, if they get a raise, they could be not kicked out, but not available to get a unit, right?
I think a larger issue with the system of affordable housing in the United States that policymakers and advocates continue to address is what we call the benefits cliff. And that means that once you no longer have access to certain benefits once your income reaches a certain level. And I think that is a macro issue across the US, that isn't necessarily specific to Charleston. And yes, you're right, it is a perverse incentive that incentivizes people not to increase their income because they would lose access to a benefit.
Okay, all right. I appreciate the information and the presentation, and I'll continue to learn. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilman McBride, you have another question?
Yeah, just one last comment. And again, this is a great presentation. And what I'm about to say is not a critique at all. So I know you're focusing on one topic, and the timing is good because with the water plan that was released recently, they're focusing on flooding aspects and highlighting areas that can be built based on elevation. And that, of course, ties into this because where can you build, where should you not build, and that limits where we can build, obviously. And the other aspect that is, again, not part of your topic, but if the limited areas that we can build in order to go strive towards the goals you laid out here are in high traffic areas with infrastructure that's way behind, that adds an extra layer of challenge. And that's what our city planners, of course, do on a daily basis, is try to figure that stuff out. I just will say that with the county and the state being for us being so reliant on the county and the state to work on our infrastructure, some of the remaining infrastructure, remaining traffic areas, stating the obvious, but I just feel I need to state it, that we need to coordinate all these plans, of course, with the county. I think probably more frequently than it seems like it has happened in the past. Just because, just for an example, one of the highline areas on the water plan was along Baybank Highway on Johns Island, and infrastructure there is way behind. So these are challenges which, if we were to take that into consideration, would slow down achieving the goal that you're laying out here. And so we have definitely not an easy solution to all this stuff. But that's what we get paid the big bucks to try to solve, right? So just want to point that out. We gotta work with the county and the state. I think integrated very tightly so that we can keep our infrastructure or get our infrastructure up to keep up in order to sustain these goals, meet these goals.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Seekings, you haven't said anything yet today. I just see you sitting on there, so
You let me sit in, Mr. Chairman. It's been very interesting to listen to, and there's certainly a lot to do. I guess my one sort of overarching observation, having looked through all this, is that really you could insert a different entity other than the city and get a broader perspective and maybe have more opportunities for success if you said, okay, the county or the region, right? I mean, why wouldn't you want to take a look at this on a regional basis? Because there are so many challenges to affordability and attainability. And one of the disadvantages we have as a city is, and we've got a few, but one is we're geographically limited. I mean, we're surrounded by other entities. We're surrounded by water, more coming at us, and land is going to be a very expensive component to doing all this. I would just think that the strategies that need to be employed need to be regional, not just city bound. So
I don't disagree with you. Housing is a regional issue.
Right.
I think that the city is trying to do what it's able to do within its bounds and set a precedent and an example for the rest of the region.
I'm a big fan of, leading by example. I think it's a really bold and good thing to do, but I think with this, in this region, of the numbers you talked about on growth, particularly the idea that there will be continued growth. I think you started your presentation by, I wrote it down, not word for word, but regardless of what we do at the city or in the region, as when it comes to attainability, affordability, and housing stock across the board, that there will be continued growth in this area no matter what.
I think that is 100% right. And that growth will happen no matter what. I think as the economic center of the region, of the metropolitan area, the impacts of that are going to be felt the heaviest in the city and by the people in the city. And thus, I would say that that necessitates the city doing something to try and alleviate those impacts.
Well, as an urban planner and someone who's been looking at this, and I'll shut up. If I were to ask you, what are the top 3 reasons that this area will continue to grow, regardless of what we do in regards to affordability, what are the top 3 reasons people are coming here? Why do people come here?
I'm going to leave that to the economists to answer that for you.
I mean, clearly it's not because we're affordable, right?
I would say that affordability is perhaps relative. And as you look around the country, right, I think what has happened over the past several years is that people have become more mobile, jobs have become more mobile, and people take their incomes with them. And so to the earlier point about higher income people coming to the city, a lot of these people are not necessarily bringing their jobs, and if they are, they're bringing their incomes, right? And
I call them business commuters. I mean, they live here, but they're working all over the place, and I think that's a big part of it.
I mean,
big part.
I would not disagree.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Councilman Parker, you have your hands up, and we'll go from that. You have and after that, Councilman Gregory, then
Thank you.
Then we'll go into, because we have executive session we need to go into, so we are going to end with that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if Councilmember Waring is here or not, but so I'm going to kind of pivot off what he's always pushed. Is there a way that we can take this report, how can we talk about regional partnership, and we've talked about, Councilmember Waring specifically has talked about the school district. How do we take your presentation and take what you're sharing with us, use it as a city, and kind of team up with, especially the Charleston County School District, because from what I've learned through Councilmember Waring, is there's a lot of opportunity there, and maybe approaching it, kind of the data that you've given us, but specifically for teachers. Is there a way that, Bloomberg or y'all can help us navigate that?
I would say that cities partnering with local school districts is something that is a best practice, and there are precedents for it. I think we are working with the city to identify best practices and precedents that the city can mold to the local context and implement here. And so that's certainly on the list. And I think we're happy to support the city and helping it to move forward with that strategy.
Councilman Gregory, then we'll kind of cut this off and go into executive session.
Accept this concept as we move toward finalization.
It's your motion?
Yes. Because it's a concept. Okay.
You heard the motion coming from Councilman
Well,
Gregory.
If it's not a concept, then I'll call it what it is. What is it?
Councilman Gregory is second by the mayor.
It's not the plan.
Second by the mayor. Any question?
Well, what was the motion?
We couldn't hear it online. I don't think.
Oh, I move that we approve this concept as we move forward for finalization.
Did you all hear it online?
I heard it.
We did. Are we just approving receiving the plan? Receiving the suggestions?
That's basically what the concept is.
Okay.
If I may, Councilman Gregory, I would say that these are draft goals. Okay. And I would say that the idea that we have brought forth is that we want to refine these goals as we go through the budget process and finalize them at the end of the budget process. So if you're putting forth a motion to move forward with using these goals to guide the budget process, I think that would make sense.
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Shealy has his hand up.
Councilman Shealy, I'll give you a short.
Yeah, well, this is real quick. If we are voting, I'm assuming it's just committee members voting and not non-committee members.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Because, I mean, for me, there's so much more to do because there is a federal requirement to produce a consolidated plan, which is in effect for 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. So when I say concept, I realize that she's gonna have to put all this together, Gianna. It's gonna be more than a notion. But if we want to accept these goals, I can change my motion to accept these goals without even understanding whether or not we're gonna have the money or where we're gonna get it from. Because that's why I put it the way I did. But if we are going to accept these goals, tell me.
I think the idea.
Should we just accept it as information?
It's up to you what you do with it. We brought forth these goals as a means to guide your work going forward. I think the city would like to set these goals to help, set a trajectory for what you do in the future. The targets, the actual numbers within them are draft. The goals themselves, the language of them is draft.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of those things are subject to change over the next several months. And,
So we're talking about accepting the draft?
I think if I may, the motion was made to accept the concept as draft. And I think that's general enough language that it gives a lot of,
It really does.
I think we're getting into semantics here. I've
Yeah.
seconded it. So I call for a vote.
Question. All in, vote by saying aye.
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 Nay.
Opposes, nay. We have one nay.
Councilmember Parker, how did you vote?
Aye.
All right, thank you. There was one nay, Councilmember McBride.
Mr. Chairman, I'd vote that we go into executive session.
Second.
Removing second that we go into executive session.
Move that we go into executive session to discuss negotiations related to the union pier.
Yes, I guess I'm gonna second that again, please, for the record.
I'll second it.
Okay. The moving second that we go into executive session for business that we're gonna take care of.
Don't forget
All
about
in
us.
favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposes?